All right, hello everyone, and welcome to One Man's Trash is Another Man's Home Lab, the 2021 edition. This is a follow-up to the 2019 edition, and the nice folks at SAINTCON were kind enough to invite me back to give you an update on the new things at the Home Lab. If you're like me and you've been coming to all these sessions, you've noticed like the stage is always the same. So if it's cool with y'all, I'm going to go ahead and make it a little more homey, just a little more cozy, if that's cool. Give me 1 second. A little table for us. This is obviously just a regular table. There, that's nice, right? See, it has a lamp on it. It's a regular table. Okay, that's better. See, homey, we all cozy now? That better? Cool. All right, I am Shaun Price, also known as Clipper. A little bit about me. I'm a UVU graduate from right here in the Valley. You've probably seen this about me slide before because I reuse it, because I hate doing this. I love Wireshark, packet capture. If you haven't done the CTF, the packet capture CTF, it's fantastic. Go play it. It's been a lot of fun. Had a lot of fun with that. I have strong opinions about VLANs and network segmentations. I've had that bullet point for probably 6 years now, and I will never take it out. I'm a mountain bike enthusiast. I love old school stereo systems, fast cars, 3D printing, and most breakfast foods, even the ones that are cut off at the bottom. So when I first thought about doing this presentation, I was like, yeah, we'll do an update 2021. And then supply chains hit. And then budgets were smashed. And then enterprises weren't replacing their gear. So all of this like dumpster diving antics that we've become so accustomed to as people just throw away gear, yeah, that dried up quite a bit. So, what have we done since last time? Now, if you came to my 2019 presentation, you might remember this slide right here. Does anyone remember this slide that I put up from 2019? And I said, hey, if someone wants to go really crazy and do something awesome, build a NAS out of that box right there, that Supermicro CSE 846. And I waited, and I waited, and none of you did it, so I did. I wish you would have done it. You would have saved me all this time and effort, but alas, I went and bought one because it looked exciting and fun. As you can see, notice that price when I bought it. We'll show you an updated version of that in just a bit. Here is the build picture, the first one I did of it. As you can see, I've actually just got a regular Intel reference board in there. That's not a Supermicro board. If you do decide to do regular Intel reference board, and you are in a Supermicro chassis, you need to buy that guy right there. And I've got a link to that. All of this information I'm going to provide via Sketch, I don't know how you say that thing. I'm going to have the presentation there. I'm also going to do a spreadsheet of all the stuff I've bought recently and kind of the links to get it. So if you're into buying some of that, you can do that. I'll make sure that little adapter's in there. Shout out to the Novell Support Connection mouse pad. That thing, I got it in 2001 on a tour of Novell's campus. I still use it daily. The chassis is right there getting built. And so if you remember before, the best place to get spinning drives is your local friendly Best Buy on Black Friday. And I said, hey, I'll see y'all there. Well, no one else came. It was just me. I drove up and down the valley on midnight on Thanksgiving evening. I called my sister to get her out of bed and say, hey, will you come with me and go to Best Buy? And she's like, that sounds fun. Thanks for the invite. Well, I didn't know if they were going to say one per customer or if they were going to they had my picture from other antics I've done at Best Buys before. I don't know. So she came with me. I drove up and down the Wasatch Front and picked up these drives. Now, everyone told me, it's like, you can buy these online, and it's the same price. You don't need to do this. I'm like, well, I'm going to be special. I'm going to go to different Best Buys to make sure I get different batches and get different serial numbers. So let's say there was a bad day at the factory, and I'll get fresh ones. All my serial numbers are like within 1,000 of each other, but whatever. I went to 6 Best Buys, got almost the same one. So anyone who's into drives and data hoarding, like myself, you have to burn these bad boys in and make sure they're good. So here they all are set up in their original cases. Rookie mistake number 1 that I have done, you shuck them first and then test them. Bad idea. Because when it inevitably fails, you have to put it back in the enclosure to take it back. There are stories about people sending them back to the factory shucked and it's okay, but for safety's sake, I think you should keep them in the clamshell until you're sure they're happy. There they are right now running bad blocks. You can see bad blocks is running right here. All 6 of them burning in. One thing that not a lot of people know is you should probably put a fan blowing down through them or on them or around them while you're doing this, because those enclosures aren't really meant to be running 24/7 really heavy workloads, and they can get hot, so just get a fan blowing on them. You'll see my super scientific sticky notes right there with the serial number of each drive and the model that I pulled off of it just for my own references. But that's them bad boxing. Luckily, they were all great, and they're in service now. And that's what it looks like in the rack, all happy and cozy. So I've got these. This is full right here of those ones that I just showed you. I put my old drives in that row, and then I've got 2 more rows for future expansion. So pretty awesome. TrueNAS looks like that. Got myself 96 gigs of RAM, storage, 10 gig, all that, and that's what ends up looking like build. So unfortunately, none of you would build it for me, so I had to do it myself. CSE 846s are now $1,300. Why? Well, companies have been asked to slash budgets, which include putting off upgrades and hardware refreshes and all that. There's a global chip shortage you may or may not have heard about. Supply lines are terrible. There's a queue outside the ports to get stuff in. Cryptocurrency mining is getting super popular and happy, so everyone's buying GPUs. Chia killed all the hard drive markets. Thank you so much for that. And you're all out there buying it. Literally, when I looked through last time, most of the things I presented were bought within about a week, and they were all dried up. So that's great. I'm glad you're buying it. It's so good. So talking about hard drive specifically on the slide, Best Buy did in 2020 do to 14 terabyte drives for $189. So they may do it again this year. I sure hope they do. If they are, we'll see you again. Maybe not. If those out in the market, is anyone in the market for GPU right now? Struggling with that one a little bit? The best place right now to find a GPU somewhat reliably is your Best Buy. They're letting people know when they're going to get their next shipments and drop in. You have to show up the next morning at about 6:30, 6:45, 7 o'clock, get your wristband, and get in line, and you may get lucky. That's where we're at with those. So what makes a good home lab? Let's just talk about the basics. We've gone over this before, but we'll do it again. You got your CPU for your compute, your RAM, ECC for servers and workstation class. You need a chassis, something to put in some sorts, of some sorts. A BMC and ILO and out-of-band management, super nice to have if you can swing it. Storage is going to be your most variable cost, of course. You get your cache, you got your capacity. Networking, we got to get some switching, 10 gig if we can swing it, which we still can, which is awesome. NICs are still available, and optics and DACs are great. Just remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. I get excited, y'all get excited, we all do it. We go to a presentation on the HomeLab, and you are all so inspired by my presentation, that you go out there and want to buy stuff. That's awesome, but just remember, there's always another deal. That's probably something my dad taught me from day one. I'd get really excited about something, and I say, Dad, this deal's only going on today. We have to do it. And he's like, there's always another deal. So there is. So if you don't get some part, that's okay. Go on to your backup plan or wait a little bit, and you'll get through it. If you remember, I created this called the Ideal Home Lab Trifecta. You've got your upfront cost of the hardware you're buying. You've got your ongoing cost, which is your power cost. And then you got your performance, and you want to balance all those three. And then you have to go through a big old gate called the co-habitant acceptance factor. That is a gnarly gate, my friends. For me, easiest gate on planet. I live alone, so anything goes. Server on the floor, server in the entryway, tripping on hard drives, that's all good. For some of you fine folks, that might not be as easy. We're going to talk about that a little bit. I dedicated a slide to it saying, yes, this is a challenge. Dealing with the CHAF. We're going to do this. Things that help you. Making a homeprod useful for everyone in your home. Build a media server and say, hey, look how easy this is to watch all of our videos. Isn't this nice? Oh, it is. This is from the HomeLab that you spent all this money and all those hours in the basement tinkering on. Great, buy more. Yes, good. Automated backups. Honey, let me install a tool that you'll never have to worry about your data. It'll automatically just back up to our server in the basement. Not to worry. Hey, good. Hey, yeah, buy more hard drives. Go have fun on Thanksgiving night fighting all those crazies out there, me included. Cameras and security. Put some surveillance up, make them feel nice and safe. Great thing. Keeping your home lab neat and tidy. Also a great thing to do. If it is oozing all over the house, you will have a bad time. Being upfront with the cost and expectations of costs. If you say, hey, running the server is only going to cost us $0.25 a day, that may be accurate. But when you do the math over the cost of a year, that's a lot of money. So be upfront with that. And then show them how it's like benefited your career, your job, your brand. Show all the great things of it. Things that hurt the home lab. It's loud. Yes, I love putting enterprise gear in my house. Yes, it's loud. No, it's not white noise. Quit telling yourself that lie. It's not. It's miserable. It's ugly. Yes. It is ugly. It's meant to go in a data center, not in your parlor. Keep it hidden. It never seems to end. There's always just one more thing to buy or change. But the number one thing I heard, and this is the feedback I got last time specifically, was there just isn't room for it. You know, I'm in a small apartment, or I've just got a bedroom in this place. There's no room for a home lab. So you know what you do? You hide it in plain sight. Thank you. So this is the beautiful IKEA lack table, which you can pick up from the fine enterprising folks at IKEA for $9.99 on sale. One sad thing about the lack, and I'll get into this in a little bit, the lack lacks. And what the lack lacks is solid legs. Years ago, they were solid all the way through, and it was great, and they worked fantastic. Recently, and even up to like 5 years ago, they've gone to a hollow leg system. So this is what I did with mine. I'm not going to hit too much on this part, like of what I did, because mine didn't turn out amazing. It's okay, but I'll tell you what went wrong. But these legs are hollow. They are a cardboard tube. So what you end up doing is you cut out that little, it's just a little end plug right there, and there's an end plug on the bottom. You pop those out, and then you drop a 2x2 down it. And when you drop a 2x2 on it, you end up with 4 solid legs. Now, when I told my dad about this project, he goes, well, why don't you just get a 2x4, cut it down so it's perfect so it doesn't wobble in there, because those legs are about 1.75, and a 2x2 that comes out to like 1.5, so they kind of rattle around in there. And I was like, well, I want to make it so if you didn't have power tools at home, or you just want to use those free cuts at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, you could just cut it to the length and use some grabber screws to tie it in there. You could cut it down to make it look a little bit better, but it's in a leg, so do we worry about that too much? So nothing too wild about these rack rails. I put them on right here. You can see the metal rack rails, and they're right here on the front. I put those on because I want it to be a little bit more robust. When you're working with a 2-post rack, all of your strength and all of your mounting security comes from having those rack gears nice and tight on those front rails. So I thought, because a lot of people just put grabber screws in it and just go right into the wood, and it makes it hard because you might not get a good grab in there. Over time, they're going to rattle, and it's going to make that wood kind of disintegrate and break apart. I did the middle rails thinking that'd be a little bit more robust, and it is. It is actually pretty sturdy in there. Like they're not going anywhere. They're solid. But the trouble is I lose the tolerance in between these legs. So right default out of the gate, you can fit most devices between those legs just fine. You put those metal rack rails in there and you lose about 1/8 of an inch, maybe a quarter. And so if you've got something that's a little bit wide, you kind of have to jimmy it in there and the legs bow out a little bit. So that's kind of one danger I ran into it. The stuff I've got in here all fits great, but I did try to put some other switches I had, and I had to run into troubles with that. Shout out to you, Kaya, for letting me borrow stuff to put in there. What it could look like in your home could look like that. That could be your home lab just sitting there right next to your Roomba. Careful with your cables, don't let Roomba eat them. I went for some other alternatives where I put like a book on it, but I think a tablecloth with the lamp's the most homey and the most acceptable. So one other thing that I've heard a lot of feedback on is I kind of take things to the extreme, and anyone that knows me knows I do this every time. I'll get an idea and I'll just become like infatuated with it, and I'll just go crazy, everything I can do about it, learn everything, go to the tens. Not everyone wants to do it that way, and that's cool. And to be honest, most of our home lab workflows that we're working with require much less resources than we're thinking. Like honestly, who's running hardcore stuff on their home lab 24/7? Most of the time, it's idle, just hanging out. So the whole point is to try out new technologies, new methodologies, learn ideas and stuff, not really running prod here. And when it's running 24/7, because you don't want to spin it down and spin it up, those twin 130-watt TDP processors that are so fast, they get pricey and they get warm, so it's not a lot of fun. So I've also found that a lot of enterprises are starting to get rid of these very small form factor devices that are used in call centers, that are used for data workers, just very tiny, not necessarily thin clients talking to a backend VDI, but we're actually talking about true small compute nodes. Now these first ones we're going to hit are actually thin clients, super affordable. This guy right here, the HP T620, $41 right now. 4-core software on a chip, AMD, or soldered on. It's a GX415, not the fastest. You're not going to win any speed records on it, but it still will work pretty well for you. You can officially have 16 gigs of RAM on one of these, but folks have taken them up to 32 gig, no problem at all. And so 4-core, 32 gig RAM with an mSATA SSD, so you can have a little storage built on there for $41. 3 of those, that's pretty cheap home lab. If you want to do like a little K3S cluster or something like that, that'd be super cool. The HP T620 Plus is all of the above, but you get a PCI Express slot. Now, what could you do with that? You could put in a 10 gig Ethernet card, which would be awesome, go up to 10 gig, or you could actually do a HBA and run a drive shelf off that guy. So you could have a shelf, just a dumb shelf full of drives hanging out the back, put an HBI in that for your compute. For $100 plus the cost of a shelf, you've got yourself the biggest scale-out NAS you could buy for cheap, super cheap. Keeping on the same topic of our thin clients, you got the HP T730. That is a 4-core SoC, but it's the AMD RX series 427. That actually has a GPU built into it. So if you want to do some GPU work built on that, you can do that. I guess it's an APU instead of a GPU, it's an APU. Again, 16 gigs RAM officially. You can take them up to 32. It has a half-height PCI Express slot, just like I spoke earlier, but it has M.2 for NVMe. So if you want to be a little bit quicker storage or utilize an NVMe you have, you could totally do it with that. One word of caution on those, there's not a lot of air that moves through those guys. So if you've got a PCI Express slot or a card that's pretty hot, pumping out some heat, you might want to think of some aftermarket cooling or get a fan blowing on there or something. You could run into some troubles. The next one we're going to come to is the Lenovo M900 Tiny. This guy is $120. Has an i5-6500T or higher. There are some higher ones. 4-core, and it does have vPro if you want to do your Intel remote stuff. Super awesome. Up to 32 gig RAM officially, and it has a 2.5-inch SATA connect in there too. So if you want to do some, like maybe a very small like hyperconverged setup, you could have an NVMe for a cache and a SATA for your capacity. Build 2-3 of those up. You'd have yourself a pretty sweet HCI lab for not too much. Keeping it on a little bit more, I'm just going to keep jumping up on the menu. Got OptiFlex 5050 micros. That way you're going up to a 7600T. One cool thing about if you stay above the 6000 and the 7000 series, you will be able to take advantage of QuickSync, Intel QuickSync, and that's kind of where where like most of the features were usable by that point. So if you want to do a pretty awesome media server and do transcoding with your GPU, that'd be a great option. These are your performance, kind of what you're looking at. If you're going to go with any of those options, that's just just benchmark so we can kind of see kind of what the cost difference does. We'll go back there just so we can kind of look. $120 is going to be in this arena right here. Your $41 are right about there, and they just kind of move up. So more money, more performance, that's how it goes. One thing I did want to show you, and I've got one here today, is this EC200A. Thanks to Dono for sending this to me. This guy was was marketed towards our friends who do like branch servers, want like just a little small compute node at their branch. Xeon D 1518, 4 cores, 8 threads, up to 64 gigs of ECC RAM. Has an ILO 4 for out-of-band management, super cool. 2 additional gigabit copper NICs, 2 3.5-inch hard drive trays, and you can 3D print those on Thingiverse. There are some adapters for them, and an M.2 and NVMe, and these can be had for $150 to $200. If you wanted to build yourself a pfSense or an OpenSense or some kind of software router, it's a good option if you're staying under a gig. Pretty cool right there. Now, this is the level setting slide for myself. I put the slide in for myself. You can just look at it. Does my workload really need 45 cores? Am I simply heating up my house for no reason? Do my workloads justify this much NVMe? Do I need PoE for every port? He chose not to listen to the voice of reason and send it anyway. Just going to send it. Okay, obtaining your components. Now we're going to go from our thin, light, cute, we can hide them there stuff. We're going to talk about a little bit bigger stuff now, which will be super awesome. Obtaining your components, these are kind of your bread and butter places to get them. End of life, decommission equipment from your employer. If you have a PC purchase program or a recycling program, see what they can do to make that a system for your employees. Be able to buy your X gear. Make sure you do proper data destruction policies, of course. Make sure to follow those. Have a guy. Have someone you know that has hardware. I'm going to plug the Utah Home Labs Discord. A lot of folks have joined that. There's tons of us out there who are buying, selling, trading, getting rid of stuff. You can find some good deals there, of course. You got your classifieds, your Facebook Marketplace, your eBays, and then your fourth would be your IT recyclers. They generally charge a little bit more. Sometimes you get a warranty. That's how it goes. Let's Talking compute, we're going to talk from the jump from 2019 to 2021. These are basically the processors in a V2 versus a V3. We are going to make the jump in 2021 to DDR4. Yes, we finally got the price down to where it justifies it, I believe. Right now, if you want to get real excited, here are the secret treasures that I promise you. Remember the ThinkServer RS-140s that I was really happy about the 2019, back in 2019? This is their Dell cousin, R220s. Those CPUs do have quick sync for that. 16 gigs of RAM, you can fit a 16x PCI Express slot in there. They're a shorter depth, they're 1U, they're quiet, they'll run all day, and they're $200. Great place to start if you wanted to start in a rack. And they fit quite nicely. That's the Lenovo one, but they're the same size. The next secret hidden one is the Gigabyte R160 and R180. These came out of various different marketing. Penguin Computing used these. Relion was one of these. These are E5 V3 V4s. They've got 16 DDR4 slots, 4 SATA hot swap bays. I know I wish they were SAS, but they're SATA. 2 PCI Express slots, and they're a full length in a 1U. So they are a full length, so full length, but in a 1U, and has a pretty good out-of-band management. And they're about $230 to $250 right now. And as far as like the age-old question, well, aren't 1U servers really loud? We always hear that. It's actually not bad. I'm running one of those myself, and you'll see a picture of it here in a bit. One thing you can always do, well, not always, if your out-of-band management supports it, or if your IPMI supports this, or if you can hop in there and change it, one great thing to do is get your CPUs in there, get your heat spreaders on there, make sure that's as efficient as you can, and crank Prime 95, crank something to start just rocking CPU. Just start churning CPU, get them hot. And then you go to your PWM and start offsetting it down, just ticking that down little by little until you get to the point where your CPUs are about to thermal, then kick it up a little bit from there, and you'll probably stay under your thermals. By doing that, you can make it idle and be much more quiet when it's not working. Granted, when it spins up, it still will spin up, and you still will hear it. But you'll know based on that exercise, doing the Prime 95 and kind of getting it where you wanted it, you're not going to overheat it. So it is great. They're quiet most of the time. If you get some really heavy loads on it, you will start to see, you will hear those fans start to throttle up. In this test bench right here, this is dual 2673 V3s, and I've actually got it idling at 92 watts. And that test system has 256 gigs of RAM in it. So that's twin 12 cores, 256 gig RAM, and we're under 100 watts. Really not bad for what you're getting there. Now, I want to talk to you about another failure, because I think that's why most of you come, is to listen about all the boneheaded things I do. When I first got that setup, I was going to do a 2690 V3. That's this guy right here on the right. 12 cores, 24 threads, 135 watt TDP. That's a hot processor. And I thought, you know what? I put one in it just to test, make sure it worked well. And I was like, okay, that's kind of where it's at. And then I said, well, this is a dual Proc motherboard. Why don't I just put 2 of these very power-sipping 55-watt processors in there? That'll be better. So I got on eBay and I bought the 2630L V3. So now I'm going to 16 cores, 32 threads. And I'm like, hey, I'm still under that TDP number. My problem is that's the only number I looked at right there. I looked at cores and CPU frequency, but I looked at the TDP. What I didn't look at was this tiny little TCase, which they have like scroll way down on the Intel Arc. If you scroll all the way down, you'll get to this little case. Now your TDP obviously is your max power load, kind of like a rough figure figuring that out. Your TCase is how much or what temperature the integrated heat spreader can actually handle and keep the CPU safe. You'll notice there's a giant difference of 89.9 Celsius to 60.4 Celsius. So I didn't even know what that was. I just went off this number and said, oh, this will be great. Let's put that in there. So I rip out my big hot processor and I put little power sipping ones in. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. I fired up. I'm like, okay, 60.4 TCase. I didn't know about this yet. And this is what it looked like. I'm sorry these slides are really ugly. You'll see them better. For this test bench, I did just one of them. So I got one here, one there. That's my CPU load. You can see it's kind of all over the place. Graph fail. I took a summarized instead of individuals. Whoops. But one thing I want to really point out is notice the temperature differences, if you can see them, right? The temperature differences is this guy, this low power, cannot break 60 degrees. So what does that do to my fan speeds? Compare those and compare those. So I put in these power sipping processors But since they were not designed to get as hot, my fans had to work double time, literally 2x time. And so my fans were working harder. The CPU core count was higher, but they had lower base clocks, so they were actually pushing harder. And if you look at my lovely graph here, I got 89 watts here, not graph, 89 watts versus 103. So I literally spent all that money to save 5 watts and make my server twice as loud. Those lasted in there for roughly a day, and I pulled them out. And then I went to the internet and started to be like, these processors are crap, what I do? No, I'm just a moron and didn't look at that. So let that be a word of warning. Look at the TDP and look at your case. If they're stable up to 90 Celsius, your fans can get away with spinning lower and letting the CPUs get a little bit warmer. So a lot of people say, I like the idea of something with a bunch of cores, tons of RAM, but I don't want the full rack. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole. I just want like a desktop. I want a desktop that I can do this stuff on. I have an answer for you. And I present to you the Micro-ATX X99 all-in-one server. Now, the first thing you're going to see is it's the X99-based motherboards from AliExpress and eBay. I know most of you, not most of you, anyone who saw me said, wait a minute, in 2019 you said don't use these. I did say that. Because there were tons of options, and there were enterprise options, and they were great. And I'd only had experience with one, and it worked, and it was fine, but I'm like, I just don't have that confidence yet. Well, the manual's actually been translated pretty well to English. Shipping time's still terrible. They're still awful. BIOS updates and modifications are now emerging via the community. There's actually some GitHub projects where people are writing new BIOSes and ways to interact with the BIOS, so you're not just stuck with whatever it shipped with. And I've built a few now, and they've actually all worked really well. You get the same E5, V3, V4 proc, DDR4 memory. The awesome thing about these is they will take ECC or non-ECC. So let's say you've got a desktop that you've got some RAM or some desktop RAM laying around. You can buy one of these motherboards, get yourself a Xeon, and put your desktop RAM in it for now until you want to buy the ECC. Maybe you never go to ECC. It's a great stepping stone to start. They come in a variety of flavors. As far as the peripherals and like the slots and what you get, they're all over the place. Kind of use this as a guide as what you want. Some will have an X16 slot. Some will have 3 X4 slots, just depending on what you want to do is the one you want. They're all pretty much the same. They're made by folks like Machinist and 2 other words I'm not going to try to say because they're hard. They can be had from $70 to $120 right now, more or less. They used to be $40 to $90, but unfortunately prices have gone up a little bit. If we're going to take a little pause from HomeLab thought, if you want to make a gaming rig for a friend or a child or something, this isn't a bad option. Especially when you get to into the processors we're going to get to in just a bit. On that note, one thing they don't have is they don't have any out-of-band management or ILO. 2 cool projects to hang out or to check out are the PiKVM and Test Pilot. Basically, network-based KVM that you can build on a Raspberry Pi. It's a great way to get out-of-band management on a motherboard that was never built for it, and it's super flexible. Put it on one server, move to the other one. It's not tied to anything, and you can do that for less than $100 versus buying a network-based KVM if you ever bought one of those. Another cool tool is an IOD, and I'm probably saying this wrong. It's probably like IODD because it's based on what it does. Has anyone ever heard of these? An IOD device? They're amazing, right? Here's mine right here. What it is, it's just a drive enclosure that you put your own hard drive in there, and it has this folder that's called _ISO. You drop every ISO you like into that folder, and when you plug it in there, it emulates a virtual disk drive of that ISO. So if you're installing an operating system, you just scroll through your options of the ISO you got in there, hit OK, plug it in. It's like you just put the disk into the machine. So no more building flash drives to install from. Super handy. These are about $100. They're great to have. And I don't work for them at all. I just like them. They're great. I like sharing my toys. Talking about X99 motherboard builds. The reason I bring these up is because you can get yourself a 6-core, 12-thread box with 64 gig ECC RAM for $289. How do you touch that in a desktop, right? It's totally unheard of. Obviously, you're going to need a case and you're going to need a power supply, of course, but likely you've got an old ATX box laying around. This takes just off-the-shelf ATX case, Micro-ATX if you want it a little smaller, generic run-of-the-mill power supply, so that's all it takes. If you want to go really big, 12-core, 24-thread, and 120 gigs of ECC RAM, under $500. You could do a lot of stuff with that box alone. If you want to nest your home lab and say, here's my home lab's virtualization platform, and then I've got sub-home labs that are nested in it. Now, here's me in 2019. I'm not making fun of anyone but myself. This is literally me. Well, what about software support? That probably won't work. Well, ESXi likes it. Windows seems to like it. Procs runs great. Regular Ubuntu off the shelf's great. I did obviously have to put a network card in there because it has a Realtek Ethernet, so you have to put one that has supported drivers, or inject your driver into ESXi if you want. But, you know, I've done a bunch of them, and they're great. I wanted to hate on them, and I really did, and I was a hater, but I am strong enough to say I was wrong, and if you want a solid home lab for on the cheap and have it quiet in a desktop case, you definitely have an option. If you wanted to go a little bit higher, a little bit more robust, the Supermicro X10s are around still. You'll get double your memory capacity. You'll get far more robust in your PCI Express slots, all sorts of options there for you. These can be had in a regular ATX form factor, so you can fit them in a regular desktop case. They do have the out-of-band management built in, but they're $275. So, you know, it's a trade-off. Do you want to roll the dice and build the cheaper AliExpress style, or do you want to build one of those? Choice is yours. They're both great. Talking about good value processors, here's my list for 2021 of the ones I like. That's not a typo. That processor is $14. It's a 2620 V3, 6 cores, 12 threads, 85 watts. And the TCase on these ones vary, but since they're going in a desktop case, you can put a big old CPU cooler on there, air. You can even do a liquid one because these are just 2011 V3s, so you can mount those. Just be careful if you do a Supermicro dual slot board, you're gonna have to do a narrow ILM. If you do a regular, it'll be a square ILM, and you can come talk to me about that after if you want. But yeah, your processors are not the expensive part of these builds. We're talking 14 up to 85, just depending on what you want. It's choose your own adventure at this point. And these will go based on the power draw. I've got a 2690 V3 in that Chinese motherboard, and the power seems to be fine with it, pushing that 135 watt proc. So far so good on there. Let's talk networking. I love talking networking. These are the network core switches and stuff for this year that I'd like to go with. First is a Ruckus 7150-C12P. You get yourself 2 SFP plus ports for 10 gig, and you get 12 copper 1 gig ports which do PoE plus. Solid core. If you're not looking for a ton of ports, great place to get one. They can be had from anywhere from 140 to 300, closer to 300 now. The 140 price, we actually on the Utah HomeLabs Discord, we actually did a group buy and bought, I think, well, they're all right there. That's the picture of them, me updating them. That was me. We all bought those together, and then we drove them up to each other. It's been great. They're super fantastic. We've got some folks that have deployed them outside, covered, obviously, but they're handling the heat just fine. The next one, if you want the kind of a bigger core, is your Brocade ICX 6610-48P. 48 ports of 1 gig PoE plus, and 8 ports of 10 gig in an SFP plus. Those are about $180 right now. Great core. I run that myself. It's been absolutely flawless. One thing you do need to keep in mind with it is it likes its power clean, meaning if you've got a modified sine wave UPS and it clicks over to it, there's a good chance your switch will reboot. You could maybe try a power conditioner. I ended up having to get more of a rack mount pure sine wave UPS to keep mine from rebooting. Now you're going to say, well, why don't you just have both power supplies plugged in, one into house power, one into the battery power? In my experience, anytime that battery flickered or the UPS flickered to test itself, you know how they sometimes will just kind of quietly go on you? My switch would reboot. And so I'd be in the middle of doing something, I'd hear that little click, and I'd be like, uh-oh. And I'd listen very carefully and for very faintly, all the fans spinning in the basement, like, oh, switch is rebooting. And that's about a 10-minute reboot. So that's super fun, let me tell you. Now, if you don't want to go the X Enterprise used gear, that's totally cool. This Micro-ATX right here that I've got listed, 24 ports of 1 gig, it's not PoE. However, you can power it via PoE, which is kind of cool. It's actually number 1 port will actually take a PoE in. I think it's the number 1 port, it's labeled. It'll actually take PoE in, so you can power it from an injector or you could power it from another switch if you want to use a distro switch. It does have 2 10 gig SFP plus ports, which is great. And it's super simple for like folks that really aren't like into networking day in, day out. It's GUI driven. There's a command line, but it's GUI driven. Super easy to figure out. Like honestly, I had never seen one, and within like 5-10 minutes, I was like, oh, this is easy enough, and got that all built up. VLANs, link aggregation, all that cool stuff. So those are some good options, and they're $110 to $130 on Amazon. You can buy those today, and they're pretty fantastic. As far as network cards go, these are pretty much kind of the tried and true. Everyone loves these ones. And I'm not going to say go buy one over the other. Make sure there's drivers for your operating system that you're going to put it in, but honestly, get what you can get right now. Whatever's on a good deal, whatever looks great, go ahead and grab that. It's just, there's not enough differences in them in kind of the use case that I have, that I've had a big reason to like say, well, I'll only buy these or only buy those. Get what you can get on that case. DAX and fiber have been completely unaffected by all of this. I don't know why. Like, you can go on fs.com today and buy yourself like 400 transceivers. They're all there. I don't know. They have not been touched for whatever reason. Storage. We're going to talk a word about HBAs, our favorite, not favorite, but something that anyone who's going to do any type of data hoarding is going to use is an HBA, and that's how you're going to basically connect all of your drives into your motherboard. These are the options, and these prices are updated for this year, and that's about what you can get them for now. Pretty much anything SAS 3008 based is going to be great. These are kind of the specific, kind of generic LSI flavors of those. Those are the prices they're running at. You can get them, they'll be great. A word of warning, HBAs need to dissipate 10 to 15 watts of heat. A lot of folks, myself included, have put an HBA in a desktop box without adequate airflow through it, and really weird stuff starts happening. You start getting random drive errors, you can get data corruption, and then one day your machine will boot and you have no hard drives. And that's happened to several of us that have worked on this, so make sure you can get some air moving across that. And it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be a ton, just get some air moving across it. If they just sit and soak in a small area or something with bad cooling, you're going to have a bad time. I was asked about specifically talking about like backplanes and connectors, and like what goes what. So this is a visual representation of what they look like, as far as you can tell a difference if you're looking at it. The way I like to do it, SATA into SAS, so a SATA hard drive into SAS, you bet your ass. SAS into SATA, you don't get your data. I literally made that up today. Hope it's okay. But yeah, that's how I remember it now. Take it, use it, spread the good word. A lot of folks talk about backplanes and what the connections look like and how they are. The easy rule of thumb, now this isn't always accurate, this is a rule of thumb, but most cases, if it's a SAS 6 gig, it's going to be the 8087 or the 8088 if you're doing internal external. If it's a 12, it's going to be the 8643 or the 8644. The easy way to remember it, 6 is a rectangle, 12 is a square. That's kind of the easy way to remember it. There are some newer, some of the late edition of the SAS 6 gigabit per second cables were the squares, the 8643s, but that's kind of the easy way to remember it. Of course, if you don't want to actually use a backplane, you can do breakouts for either. Go from here to individual SATAs. A lot of folks do this, and it works just fine. You can find those at any cable place that you want to get them. They're easy. They work well. Talking about the backplane, you kind of say, well, what does my backplane need? It really depends on which manufacturer your backplane is. Supermicro is awesome. If you click on that link, and this will be in the slide deck, of course, that'll take you to the documentation on the backplanes. It'll tell you what their features are, what their capabilities are, what kind of connections they need. It's all right there super well. And the power can usually be an old school Molex, or it could be something proprietary, something hanging off the board. Just be careful when you're out there buying. If you're buying a generic case and putting a different motherboard in it, that's where you're going to kind of run into issues. But if you're buying something that's kind of like built as a storage node, it's going to be all connected anyway, and it's all in. You're not going to really have to worry about it unless you have to replace your HBA. And in which case, you're just kind of looking at the end and going, oh, I need one that has that end on it. Okay? Storage. This has turned fun. Thanks to Chia, storage is hard and painful, but it's still here. If you want to go the speedy, fast SSD NVMe route, the P3600 and P3605 are beautiful. 400 gig to 2 terabyte capacities, fantastic write endurance. You will have a hard time murdering those drives. Like, you can, like, don't try, but they'll go for a long, long time. Like, we're talking literally like double, triple the write endurance of our SATA friends. As far as the SATA side goes, I like the S3500 still. Those are current prices. So 480 gigs are about $40, and then 1.6 will run you about $150, and those will just be regular SATA. As I said earlier, with your hard drives, still the Easy Store, the Elements, the MyBooks, the Shucking, these are your best bet to get the cheapest spinning storage you get. One website I do want to point you to is shucks.top. That tracks all of the ones that are easily shuckable and easily usable, and it'll actually give you kind of a buying guide on whether it's a good deal or not a good deal or to hold off. So check in on that as you're looking for those. If you want to go the SAS route, cool. Those drives are starting to come out, not come out, those drives are still available-ish. You have to have a SAS backplane, obviously, or a SAS connector. If you go to bitdeals.tech, they are selling those right now, 8 terabyte SAS drives for $100. So you can pick those up, not too bad. Now, remember when I said earlier in the presentation that we were going to talk about some kind of more the bigger, stronger, big storage chassis, and I said the CSE 846s are ridiculously expensive now. I do have 2 options for my friends here. This is the CSE 836, the Super Micro. This is a little cousin of it. It is still on the V2, so you're going to be with DDR3 memory in this case. But this is fully kitted out for sale right now. Twin 2620 V2s, 32 gigs of RAM. It does have a dual port SFP Plus in a 10 gig NIC with SFP Plus. 2 920 watt platinum Super Micro power supplies, 16 bay, 3.5 inch, shipped $500 right now. And if you want to know where to buy it, it's the same place as this. The second is a brand new, and when I say brand new, like I've been working on this presentation for a while now, like literally testing on this was going on last night. So this is fresh off the HomeLab research. It's a do-it-yourself setup. You bring your own E5, V3, or V4 CPU. It has 2 10 gig NICs. Has the very versatile SAS 3008 HBA, redundant 700 watt power supplies, 12 3.5 inch SAS/SATA, and you can see kind of the way that they're arranged. It's a 1U that you actually slide the cover off and you set them down in it. Kind of cool. And has 4 2.5 inch SSD hot swaps up front. So if you want to do some cache on there on the front and have your spinning storage a little bit farther in that and have it all in one, and it's $200 right now. What they look like right now, and thanks to Vortex for doing this for me, this is what it looks like. So there's your drive caddies there. You got your CPUs and memory in the back. The little removable caddies are actually kind of nifty to pop those out. As far as booting up on it, we put CPU and RAM in there. It works fine. Got to the BIOS, so it looks like they'll work just fine for if you wanted to build a cool ZFS box or any kind of mass storage box. They're pretty sweet there. This is Bash Ninja's box. I sent him this price list to get through it. This is sitting in a Super Micro X8 1U case. So old garbage case, or not garbage case, old box. It's an old box. We did retrofit it with a Micro-ATX AliExpress motherboard. That is a 10 gig network card right there. And he's just got his SSD hanging out there. Fitting in a 1U, little low profile of that. We'll have that build available as well if you want to kind of build something small and light in a 1U form factor. Next one that a good friend Chucker J built. He is a support engineer. He did want to run all the desktops. I think he'd massed somewhere like 4 or 5 desktops for his actual compute work. He's a support engineer, so he's really tasked with bringing in a lot of like customer info or duplicating customer issues rather. Like we're on this version of this software doing this, that, and the other. We need to build that and so we can test stuff. The cool thing about his is, I don't know if you can see it very well, he's got 32 VMs running on this guy. And in a box that has 256 gigs of RAM, this is a V2, but he's got 2 of those P3605s I told you about. So he's got 20 of those SSDs. And it's sitting in a very attractive just ATX box, sitting on his desk. Totally quiet, runs all day, he's happy as a clam with it. So kind of some cool stuff that other home labbers have been doing, kind of give you some ideas on what's been helpful for him. That if you look in that top corner there, that's actually that MikroTik switch I referenced a little bit earlier. So coming full circle, some resources to follow and contribute to as we learn and pay this forward. Serve the Home, the Buyer's Guide and Forums, great resource. A lot of folks doing some cool stuff there. Reddit, the HomeLab group, the Data Hoarders, super great. I do Google image search a lot. Basically, it's like SFF 8087. Yep, okay, that's what that looks like, you know. Obviously, YouTube. If anyone wants to join the Utah Discord for Utah Home Labs, that's right there. If you don't want to scan the QR code, I get it. There's the URL to type it out manually. And with that, I'll leave it on there so everyone can get it. Do we have any questions that you'd like to ask me or things that I've not gone well over? Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. So the question was using basically a notebook and using the M.2 NVMEs and expanding that out to something else, PCI, because it's PCI Express. Just notch it out, yeah. uh, okay, so the closest I've done to that, I haven't done that specifically, but the closest I have done, I have gone from the M.2 out to a U.2 adapter. So I've gone to M.2 to U.2, that works perfectly. I've never done one of those, what you're describing, but I want to now, because that sounds pretty cool. One thing on the back of this, or on the bottom of this guy, that is an M.2. So you could actually expand this out with this guy being your head node, right? So, awesome question. I wish I had an answer that I've done it, but it's something we absolutely will discuss and look at. That'd be super cool. Any other questions? That's a fantastic question. Question is, how do you separate homeprod from homelab? And there's tons of ways of doing it. Me personally, what I've found been the best for me is I consider the actual bare metal as my homeprod. And so that box that gigabyte box, the dual V3s that I've got, that actually is running ESXi, and then my HomeLab is nested within it. And so my HomeProd, my core bare metal running ESXi has got my HomeProd boxes they're actually running like the VMs that are running the home automation, media servers, backup servers, all that good stuff. And then what I've done is I install either another virtualization hypervisor or like a container, something to run containers on or something within it as a VM. So then I just nest my HomeLab within prod. By doing that, I can make it, break it, crash it, mess with all these VMs that are nested in, and I never break my prod. The other cool thing is you're not really dependent on fancy switches and networking and stuff because it's all virtual, right? So if you want to do some cool distributed switches, and you're talking memory speeds at that point because you're never hitting wires, right? So mine is, I do a nested method where I've got my prod one and then I nest my lab underneath it. That's how I do it. For some people like to go with like, if you're running a media server, they want that physical so they can take advantage of quick sync and all that stuff. That's one way to do it. That's kind of one of the things I brought up with those little low power boxes that I like to use. Those make good home prod stuff. Say, hey, this little box just does this, and that's where it lives. I used to virtualize my main router, my OpenSense router. I used to have it virtualized. But the trouble I ran into is if, for whatever reason, I wasn't available and someone was at my house and wanted to reboot it, it's a lot easier to say, hey, you see that black box that's plugged in there? Just unplug that and plug that back in, versus, okay, first what you need to do is log into my hypervisor. And once you get into the hypervisor, find the OpenSense. Okay, go ahead and reboot that after logging into that, right? So I typically like to run a physical edge firewall now because that reason. Also, if I happen to break my virtualization, I lose the internet, which is kind of a pain. Any other questions? Yes? So I guess it really comes down to, if preferred is like, which one do you want to learn or which one do you want to like use long term, right? So if let's say you're an ESXi shop or you're a VMware shop at work, I'd say run ESX. So you're actually running it at home. If you want to have all the bells and whistles and all the good stuff that you get at work, you can sign up for VMUG Advantage. That's $200 a year from VMware, and you get everything they have. It's literally an all-you-can-eat buffet of VMware goodness. And so there was a time when I actually ran vSAN at my home, hyperconverged, and then I realized how terribly expensive that was and painful. So I did do that. If you're looking just like I want to get my feet wet and kind of have the free alternative, I don't really care too much about VMware, Proxmox is a great option. A lot of folks really like Unraid. Unraid's very popular, and a lot of folks run that. I've run it in the past as a test, and that's good. One thing that's coming down the pipeline that I'm really excited for is TrueNAS Scale. And what that's going to give us is that's going to give us build out NAS in a hyperconverged solution where actually our storage, our ZFS storage, can scale out as we add nodes, and it will actually host containers and VMs and jails and all that. So that's super cool coming down the pipe too. And slides are going to be on the Sketch link after, and then just I'll have there, and then also have the Google spreadsheet with all the stuff, like with links you can buy it. And there's no affiliate code, so I don't want your money. Cool. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.